Good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast. I'm excited to wrap up the week, August 18th, I think we are at here. We're going to be talking about the top common problems and myths around government contracting, proposals, et cetera, especially as it relates to the contracting shop. So we're going to be talking about that. Before we get started, I'd just like to give a quick tip as a thank you to those showing up early and on time. That gets cut out of our replays later, right? So you lose out on the tip if you don't show up live. But the tip I wanted to give you is to remember, especially as we're in the end of the year activity, is to not get caught up with what I call constructive procrastination. You might have also heard of it as paralysis by analysis. This idea that you spend so much time doing something that could be rationally seen as work, but it's not what you should be doing. For example, end of the year, the best way to win a contract is to pick up the phone and talk to a customer, right? Second best way might be to respond to an RFI or things like that. But if you're not picking up the phone, but instead you're researching, et cetera, then you're not doing enough of the right activity, the activity that you need. And so the tip around that is to make sure you're focusing on the actual work that needs to be getting done instead of the constructive procrastination type work. The reason this idea came up for me today is yesterday I was talking to a customer and they were surprised that I had said, don't research a customer before you reach out the first time. You know, that very first call to schedule a meeting. I'm like, why bother? If they don't answer the phone, you've just wasted all that research time. Instead, schedule a meeting and say, hey, let's meet in a week. Give me time to prepare properly. I'm not going to research them before I call, because if I call 100 people, 50% won't even talk to me. So watch out for that as you're in this end of the year thing of doing things that are more constructive procrastination instead of constructive activity. All right, so let's dive into today's training. That was just a thank you to those showing up early and on time. I really do appreciate you doing that. Let's LinkedIn push the word out that that we're training and we're live and we're getting rolling. So let me get my tech lined up. I think we're good to go. Let's get started talking about the top contracting mistakes and myths. Contracting mistakes and myths that are holding you back from success. I really want you to have the success, and it's important to constantly be evaluating you and your company to say, you know, what's holding us back? Well, here I'm going to give you the some of what's holding you back from the horse's mouth, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. One of my favorite jokes out there, and because I'm such a dry humor kind of a guy, you know, somebody goes into the hospital and says, doctor, it hurts when I move my arm like this. And the doctor looks at him and says, well, don't do that. It's like, okay, that makes sense. That's literally what we're going to be talking about today. Contracting officer, it hurts when I do this. Don't do that. I put in here, if you're looking at my screen, Anna Ehrman. If you don't know who she is, go and follow her on LinkedIn. You can probably just reach out and connect with her and say that I told you she's somebody you should be following and connecting with. Very active, very committed to the government's mission. She works for the government now, and she's very committed to small business success out there. But I remember when Anna and I, we had known each other for a little bit, but I did this interview with her and several of her colleagues from around the country in the PTAC, back when she was in the PTAC program. And at the end of this session, this panel session that I was doing, I went a round table. I said, what's one last tip you would give us? And Anna happened to be the last person to talk. And she was listening. I get to her and she goes, just do what we say. She goes, you come in and you use small businesses, whoever, right? You come in and you talk to us and you get our advice, and then you go do something else. You're not hurting our feelings, but if you want success, do what we say. If we tell you, make your capability statement look like this, if we tell you, go knocking on doors this many times or something, do what we say. Well, that's literally, again, what we're going to be talking about today in training, not what Anna said, but what contracting officers say. And I'll talk to you about that more in a minute, because that's this idea of you want to learn from your customers, right? Don't just try to figure it out on your own. I often run into people who are trying to just do it all by themselves. I'm like, why? There's people like me that have made mistakes. You don't have to listen to any piece of advice I give you, but it'd be smart of you to listen to any mistake I made as a small business owner over a 20-year period and go, you know what, I'm going to make new mistakes. I'm not going to make those mistakes. And so learning from your customers to talk with your customer who encounters these common mistakes or hears these myths from industry, that when you talk to them and you learn about them, you can learn and you can improve your success. So that's what we're going to cover down today. I want to talk about the source of these myths and mistakes, right? None of them are my opinion. I didn't create this list, and none of them are from retired folks who I love. They're great, right? These ones I'm sharing today, though, are literally out of current contracting officers' mouths. And so I want to talk to you about that source. And then I'm going to cover down on the second and third bullet here of talking about first, the top proposal mistakes. I'll watch my time, and half the time will be around some of those. And you can see there's 29 of them. There's no way I'm going to get to them all, but at least I can show you, and you can, do a screenshot. Don't ask me for the slides. You're just making me do extra work, right? So I'm giving you the information. You go ahead and take a screenshot. And number three, top myths. There's 28 of those. I'll spend half my time trying to dive into that. So that's what we're going to cover down today on. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When we follow a process A to Z, or from research to sales, we have repeatable and predictable results. That's what I want for you. I want you to be able to have your business, the company you work for, to have repeatable, predictable results. And when you keep coming back to this training, that's part of the process, right? Learning. If you haven't done so already, please put your company name into the chat. If you're on YouTube, Facebook, somewhere else, put it into the comments. If you're watching the replays, put it in. Let us know who you are, because this isn't just training. This is a community. We do these trainings every single day. Right? We've done well over 325 videos in the last 15, 16 months or something. And people come in. I still get people watching those videos. And so they can see your commenting and engagements. This is a way for you to build your network. And that's that last bullet I have here. Make sure you engage with other people. If you see somebody you're interested in connecting with, right here in the chat, you can say, hey, I'd love to connect with you. You want to connect offline? Sure, send me an invite. Right? And if you don't do it right now, then follow back up and go, well, who was at that training? Let me see if maybe I can reach out to them. I was at Neil's training. You were at Neil's training. Perhaps we can connect and talk. Right? Now you have a relationship that I'm not in. You don't need me as a third wheel. All right. Let's get diving into the meat of today's training, talking about, first, I just want to quickly go over where these mistakes and myths are coming from. And so they come from the Army, right? Recently, there was this whole, and I shared it out there as a separate LinkedIn post, but I loved it so much, I wanted to really dive into the training. But in DOD, the Army contracting officers, these 14 chiefs of contracting office, and I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but basically they're each a chief of contracting office. That's their title. And the reason I say that, and it's really important, is because that means they're up here. They have all these people who are below them, a lot of people they're supporting. I think there's 900 people in this organization alone around acquisition. So they're all in acquisition command. And you can see in the third bullet that this group of people they and their team managed $42 billion in FY 2022 alone. So they're doing a lot. They're seeing a lot of responses to their RFPs, et cetera. And so they're the ones who can really give us this idea of the common mistakes we make in particular, and the myths they hear from those of us in industry that they wanted to correct. And I'm going to work a little bit towards doing that. One of the things I loved about this organization, the reason I want to share their information, is because up until recently, the goal is 23% going to small business. And this organization is going far beyond that goal. They're far beyond the federal goal. I always say, if somebody actually cared about small businesses, they would hit the goal. They wouldn't give me an excuse of why they couldn't hit it. Oh, I couldn't find somebody that works too hard, whatever. No, if you're making excuses, you just don't value small businesses. These people value small businesses. And so this is really important. By the way, this is Aberdeen Proving Ground. Now that I'm saying how great they are, I better tell you who they are. It's Aberdeen Proving Ground under the Army Contracting Command, right? So go take a look at them. But these are the mission areas they support. You can look at it yourself, but they cover down on a pretty broad group of activity in there. So I've got 4 slides, and I need to monitor my time. If it's your first time with me, I do not go over time. I stop right at 12:30. Even if I want to tell you something at the end, I'm like, oh, I'm done. But I have 4 slides, 2 slides for the common proposal mistakes we industry make when submitting proposals, and 2 slides on the common myths. And so I'm going to try to go through. I'm not going to cover on all of them, so try to read some of them as you go forward. Take a screenshot on there. Otherwise, you can go look for a post that I did that had the original source on this. So let me get started on just talking about it. Number 1 here. A common mistake that government contractors make when submitting a proposal or being involved in a proposal is not being involved too early. Certainly not being involved early enough to impact the strategy. This is what we call shifting left, right? When we talk about your sales cycle, the earlier in the sales cycle, the earlier in the government's acquisition life cycle you can get, the more you can impact strategy. So go watch some of my training. This is the last time I'll say go watch my training, but I have training on every one of these, right? So go watch my training and see how do you shift left. Another one that I was looking at, just a couple of them combined, 3, 4, and 8, I'm going to talk about for a minute. And what they are, another common mistake that government contractors make when submitting proposals is they're either not meeting the submission requirements. The government says in order to submit us a proposal, it must have this set of requirements met, this information, criteria, et cetera. When you do submit it, and this goes into number 4, a mistake we make is parroting the PWS, the performance work statement or the statement of work. We're basically just taking what the government wrote and put it in our proposal. So if they say there's 5 task areas and you must do this kind of stuff, and you grab that over and go, you change all the you must to we wills, and basically you just, yes, we will do what you just wrote. If that's all you're doing, that's called parroting, right? You're just a parrot repeating back to the government what they already wrote. That is of no value to them, right? You're writing pages, but that's when you can tell that you're doing something wrong, is when you're not winning, but you're submitting a lot of proposals. It's often because we parrot the PWS. We don't think to ourselves, how can we actually write to that? And that goes to number 8. I said these 3 are together. Number 8, for a common mistake we make in submitting a proposal, is that we don't demonstrate how we're going to fulfill all the shall statements, right? So shall statements throughout the proposal process, anybody who's been in this a while, we know that the first thing we're looking for is shall statements to make sure our proposal addresses every one of them. But it's not enough to say, if they say thou shall not do something or thou shall do something, it's not enough for us to say, I shall do this, we shall do this, right? What they want to know as it relates to number 8 is how are you going to fulfill those shall statements? If I say you shall make sure that there's 24/7 coverage, I don't want you to say we're going to make sure there's 24/7 coverage, guaranteed, right? That's awesome. How are you going to do it? Well, we're going to do it with 4 people and they're going to be staggered and we're going to make sure they have time off or whatever. Whatever the answer is, you want to make sure that you're communicating through that shall statement that you understand what they wanted by the shall statement, and you're communicating clearly in a way that they can go, yep, if they do what they said they would do, they'll cover down on that shall statement. That kind of goes a little bit into number 5 as well. I teach a lot about federal sales, right? I don't actually teach on writing proposals. There's other people who are very focused on that. So I shift left in the process, and my area of expertise is around the sales, BD and capture. And number 5 talks about another common proposal government contractors make, common mistake that government contractors make when submitting a proposal or moving forward on the proposal, is not demonstrating or having an understanding of the requirements. This has always been a big deal to me, and this is something I say should be done in the very earliest stages of capture. If you have an opportunity and you put it into your pipeline, and it comes with a statement of work, it comes with a performance work statement, PWS, whatever, right? It comes from something from the government, or you go in and have meetings, you're trying to understand those requirements, not just list the requirements. Listing requirements is kind of like this compliance matrix exercise. That's cool. You've written them down. But do you understand the requirements? Do you understand why we want these requirements? Are you aligning it back to some challenges we have? I'll try to tell you a really quick story about a requirement that was missed by IBM, multi-billion-dollar company. This was 20 plus years ago. But they used to make this device. It was a scanner. Parts would come through. They'd scan it and they move on. Parts would come through. Anyways, there was going to be a recompete, and they wanted a new device, better device. And the government put out this notice saying, we want new scanners. And they had all these requirements. And one of the things the IBM people said internally, because the business developer and the people who were working for IBM, they're like, oh, we can cut the cost because we're an incumbent. We know this customer. We can cut costs because we know they say they want this scanner to be able to survive a 8-foot fall or a 7-foot fall, right? And they're like, no, the table is only 5 foot. So I know where they scan it. It's like this, they scan it. And so they made their proposal, and they submitted a proposal where basically they said they would make sure that it survives an impact of 5 feet. They're the incumbent. They're a billion-dollar firm. They lost out and they were shocked. And they went in to find out why, because they were lower price, et cetera. They went in to find out why. And the contracting officer said, because you didn't do the 9 foot. It's like, what's the 9 foot matter? I don't know. Let's go talk to the technical people. And the technical people said, sometimes our employees, not all of them, but sometimes our employees raise that scanner up, drop it, it breaks. They can have a coffee break until it's fixed. It's like, that's why they did it. You didn't understand the requirements. That's why when you think about common proposal mistakes, it's really important that not only do you demonstrate the requirements and understanding of the requirements, but you have an understanding of the requirements. Okay, so let me come down and grab another one as we move forward. Some of these are really basic attention to detail. I'm a stickler on attention to detail. So number 9 is where it says information and proposals. When it's in more than one place on different pages, the same type of information, it's not consistent, right? So that's something you just want to pay attention to, is that if you're going to be writing about your solutioning or your approach, make sure there's a level of consistency on there. This is something that's really important as it relates to reusable content. If you have a commitment to creating good reusable content, then it will be kind of impossible to have it different in different places, because you're using a body of content that has been validated by the content owner, whoever that is, like your solution engineers, you, if you're a one-person company, et cetera. Okay, so let me pop to the next page, because you've read some of those. These are all new, 14 new proposal mistakes. And so if you're looking at my screen and you're seeing this, you're able to come down. By the way, I don't know if you've already done this, but you can turn off closed captioning so it doesn't show up on the screen. But I want to come through here on looking at some of these as we go forward, right? So some of these start diving into like cost. Number 3, not providing a clear cost narrative that explains how the costs have been developed. This is something I hear from contracting officers over and over again, is the ones who mention this type of problem, is that you're recommending something or you're saying something as if it should be just assumed to be fact. Here's the cost, here's the pricing, et cetera. But you're not walking us through how you got to that point. And when you don't do that, we have doubt. Sort of like the justice system, right? Reasonable doubt makes me wary of your proposal. You want to remove doubt by giving them the explanation they need, especially on number 3, as it relates to cost. And an easy way to do that is to just walk them through the process. The way we got to this cost, the way we determine all the costs is this, right? Why are you adding something special on? Well, because this is a risk. Another good thing about explaining the cost is if somebody else leaves it out, your rationale has now made that kind of a requirement where they go, oh, we should have put that in, but at least these guys saw it, added that cost, and now it covers down on something. Another one here is important one for you to kind of remember is shifting left. Number 7, a proposal mistake that happens is not submitting questions under the draft proposal. Now, sometimes people mean just they're complaining because you're submitting questions at any old time. But what I really align this to be is not asking questions when you have the chance to ask questions. Early on in the cycle, depending on which acquisition shop you work with, et cetera, you have the chance to respond to the government as they're working the requirement through, whether it's an RFI or a source assigned, or sometimes there's pre-RFPs where an RFP draft comes out. The government is saying, ask us any questions, let us know where we might be getting something wrong. And so when you don't participate in that, your proposal doesn't have a chance to be as strong as it could be. Another one that just to me is pretty straightforward things, but not complying with the number 12, not complying with the material requirements of a solicitation. This is a common mistake government contractors make when they submit a proposal, right? They submit whatever they think, et cetera. You miss the very fundamental things of material requirement. By the way, what that means is they tell us what they want in the proposal. You shall do these things are what they want in the contract, right? But they also have how the proposal should look. I put an example in here. I don't know if it's on this page. Oh, right. Number 1, right? So number 1, they talk about not reading the solicitation careful for compliance. That's like number 12, where you're not paying attention to the material requirements. One of the things that we make mistakes on is not submitting an Excel spreadsheet for pricing. Instead, we do it in Excel and we print it to PDF. We think that might be more helpful. What we don't understand when we do things like that, first off, we're not being compliant, so you need to be compliant. But the second thing is they need to go manage that or evaluate that cost internally. They need to look at it and analyze the numbers. Well, that's a lot easier if it's in a spreadsheet, right? So if it's not in a spreadsheet, not only is it not easy for them, but you're just automatically disqualified, right? So that's really important. The one that I put at the bottom is just an odd one that sits in there, right? Submitting a proposal after due date. And the reason I even left this in, it's amazing to me that this is a common mistake, but I don't know why this is a common mistake the contracting officers really care about. But here's how you get around that. Submit the proposal 24 hours in advance. I grew up in a household that the clock was set 5 minutes in advance, so you'd never be late. Do the same thing with your proposals. When you have a proposal, say the proposal is due at this time, this day. That means internally it's due this time, this day, right? Don't give yourself that last 24 hours. If you do, you're all the way up against the wire. If you commit to the 24 hours beforehand, if anything unexpected happens, you have time. But flip it around, say your email goes out, your internet goes out, these things happen. It's not the government's, they don't care. They can't care. They have rules they have to follow. And so all you have to do to avoid number 14, submitting late proposals, is just say it's due a day earlier. All right, let's talk about top contracting myths that are out there. So the first one I talked about were common proposal mistakes. These are mistakes we make when submitting a proposal or working on a proposal. Here it is just much more broadly contracting myths that we have, that government thinks the industry has, or these contracting officers see industry talk about all the time. So the first one is coming up, number 2 that I like. It's impossible to get CPAR's rating above satisfactory. One thing to keep in mind with any of these myths is that these are just 14 people. In fact, number 2 is just one person who wrote it down. 14 people gave 2 each, right? And so the person who wrote this, it's true, and I'm going to come back and talk about it. But just because it's true for them does not mean it's not true for another agency. There are agencies out there that all of us know will only give satisfactory. They just won't do the job to figure out who's very good or exceptional, right? That's one-offs. In your mind, though, what I would say is where it says number 2, it's impossible to get CPAR ratings above satisfactory. The way you really make sure you're driving towards very good and exceptional CPARs is it's a 12-month cycle. There's this great line in politics. The minute a politician gets elected, they're starting to run their next election, right? Their next campaign. Their campaign starts again. It should be the same for you. The minute you win a contract, your CPAR's process begins. Right from the beginning day, kickoff is when CPARs begins. Hey, we'd like to get exceptional. We understand this is what's required for satisfactory. We're thinking this is what we can do that's for exceptional. How, talk it through with them, and then talk it through with them at every single monthly report. Don't get to the end and be surprised. You deserve satisfactory if you wait that long, right? You want to be talking that through to your customer throughout in order to get something. Coming down, this number 3, trade-offs and LPTAs are the only source selection technique. And I think there's a couple of LPTAs, and I really want to talk about this because sometimes we think to ourselves that the government's moved into lowest price technical acceptable. The first thing about that is the government moves in waves, right? We'll see if it continues, but basically, if you look in the history, they move in waves. One day they're doing LPTA, and another day they're doing it on best value or something, or best solution, whatever. But my point here is you really want to drive forward on LPTAs. I see people walk away from LPTA contracts because they're worried that it's just going to be the lowest bidder. Part of capture is going in and helping the government see that the lowest price technically acceptable should be higher, right? Raise the technically acceptable. An example could be get the contract to be all CMMI level 3s. If you push that up, then it begins to get rid of these people who lowball the price in there. The government doesn't just do LPTAs. My entire last contract, no LPTAs. Like, I mean, it wasn't like I avoided them. There was nothing out there. And so as you move forward, ask the government contracting officer that you're working with, the shop you're working with, where they're at. Somewhere else, number 6, it says, here's another myth that we have in contracting sometimes, is that, and there's a double 2 here, right? By the way, if you don't know, CO and KO stand for contracting officers, KO is for military, but they only give, the myth is that contracting officers only give minimal information required at the post-award debrief. Another one that's somewhere on this myth is that only those who didn't win can get a debrief. And I'll tackle that one first. Everybody can request a debrief, and if the contracting officers are doing any debriefs, winners and losers can get it. Going with the idea of what they share, some people only share the minimal information required. They just get by. Those are the same people who give satisfactory CPARs. But for the most part, when you go in, you can get a full debrief. They will have the evaluation, or people who can come in and speak to the technical evaluation and the price or the contracting side. They will talk to it. A big part of it, though, is to make sure you're going in with the questions you want to get answered. Don't just look for them to tell you something. If I was going into a debrief, I might even send questions ahead of time saying, hey, I'm excited. Thanks. This is what I'm hoping to cover. Let them come back and say, well, 1, 5, and 7, we can talk about. The other ones, no. All right, cool. But you drive that path that's going to happen. Number 8, I really love. There's this idea. I don't know if you're familiar with OTAs or other transaction authorities, but there's this myth out there that they move much faster and they're so much easier than FAR-based contracts. That's not true. It's not true at all, right? There's a lot of excitement around them, and partly because they can bypass the FAR or something, right? But think about 8A direct awards. 8A direct awards. A program office can work with an 8A. They can be talking about it. The funding can be there, and then they go right to the contracting officer, right, and engage the SBA BOS if that's necessary. But they can make that process happen pretty fast. Still FAR-based, completely FAR-based, but it's really less about the approach people are using and just whether people have the ducks in a row. Sometimes you go into an OTA process and you find it just stretches forever. And other times I could see somebody turn something around in 2 weeks on a FAR-based contract. It just depends on which organization you're in. So one more that I want to pull from this page that I was looking at is contractor opportunities can be wired for particular companies or incumbents. Number 11, the contracting office is saying it's a myth that contracting opportunities can be wired. I just want to point out that when you hear things like that, don't listen to it. You've got to begin to talk to people who are out there, because absolutely things are wired. That's how wired works, whether you like it or not. The problem with a statement like this is that what this contracting officer is saying is that it's not allowed. But does it happen? Yes. And really, it's not necessarily bad, because wired is about capture. It's about showing the government, like, for example, I was never a Microsoft Gold company. So if somebody is getting the requirement that it has a Microsoft Gold partner, then I'm out of the mix. And this other company, they're now starting to get it wired for them. It's hard to get it wired straight down to one person, but I just did a contract, $200 million contract. And in there, the key personnel, there's like one person in the world who had the certification mix that they were saying. I'm like, tell me that's not wired. But the thing I really wanted you to pay attention to is, just because something looks like it's wired doesn't mean you're going to lose it. If it's in your sweet spot, you can still go after that, because I've gone up, and I've talked about this in other training. I've gone up against wired contracts. I've gone up against contracts where the core didn't want us. They wanted the incumbent. I've gone up against contracts where the incumbent had a spouse and somebody else on the other side. And that guy took himself out completely, which is great. I mean, they did the right thing, and we were able to win beating it out, right? So generally the government is very, very fair about it. And so they're not going to wire it. Obviously, it's your job to make sure an opportunity you want to go after is unwired. Tell the contracting officer when you see a problem. So here's a whole bunch more. I'll just leave it on here for 1 second, where you can take a screenshot if you want, but I just wanted to hit one thing. Lowest bidder always wins. Number 1, this is a myth. The lowest bidder, first off, doesn't always win. If the government gets a bunch of opportunity or proposals, and most of them average around 5 million, but somebody's in there with $1 or $2 million proposal, they don't take that serious at all. They just look at that and go, you must be doing something wrong. If everybody else is saying this, we're pretty much just going to discount you, because it just seems unrealistic that you are bidding unrealistically low, right? And they kind of do the same thing with somebody at the other end. If somebody else is at 10 million, but everybody's around 5, they're like, I don't know what you're bidding, right? And so as you look at that, don't worry about being the lowest bidder. Make sure you're being a correct bidder, right? You can put efficiencies into your company that help you be able to do a lower cost, but it's really important to just push forward on that. Okay, so just make sure as you move forward, hopefully you took screenshots. You can watch the replay, do the screenshots, but understand these mistakes and myths, and then avoid making them again. They're already out there. I want you to have a good weekend. I hope everybody remembers that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. Ending on time is a process, so I'm going to do it now, but I will see you at the next training. Hopefully you'll come back Monday.